Hey Emma,
Yes, Madeline.
what do you call the place where hits like Moves Like Jagger and She Will Be Loved are created?
I don't know what do you call it?
Maroon Factory 5. Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your apparently not as clever as I thought I was host, Madeline.
I'm your not at all clever host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning into the show. I really thought that was I was like very pleased to have come up with that joke. And the fact that it took you a full 5 seconds to get it was hard for me.
I was trying to see, the thing is, when there's two games, I was trying to find Stalker in there for like a second before I was like, oh, it's just Rune Factory. And then I understood it and it was good.
Okay. I'm sorry that I've set the precedent that it's just yeah. Anyway, this week, listeners, we are going to be talking about Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, and Rune Factory 5. Two games with very similar tones.
Yeah.
Pretty much exactly the same.
It's about exploring the space,
Amnesia.
getting to know people, fighting.
Basically the same.
Same games.
I can't wait for Harvest Moon Nuclear Wasteland. Coming soon.
That would be good. I think someone should make that. There probably is a version of that somewhere.
Probably, but you're right that like it should be bigger. Anyway,
yeah,
we can talk more about farm sims in the second half of the episode. But shall we get our stock on?
Yeah.
Let's do it. All right. So, Stalker, Stalker.
Of all the words in this title to mispronounce, I was not going to think it would be Shadow.
I was already thinking of getting to the Chernobyl, and so I was like, anyway. Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl is a first-person shooter, survival, horror game developed by GSC Game World and published by THQ in 2007 for Microsoft Windows. And you may be thinking, a game about being a stalker, that's weird. But you would be mistaken. I mean, maybe it is weird, but stalker in this game stands for scavengers, trespassers, adventurers, loners, killers, explorers, and robbers. Yes. And so you may still be thinking that's weird, but it's a little bit less weird for a video game.
Yeah, if you're, more intellectual or, I don't know, stuck up or something, you might have been like, no, not stalker, like stalking someone around. Stalker, like the art film by Tarkovsky.
Oh, of course. Of course, you're right. When I hear the word stalker, the first thing I think of is the Tarkovsky film.
Yes, but in this case it's correct, because that is what it is actually referencing. The Stalker video games are very loosely inspired by Stalker, and the Roadside Picnic was the name of the book that the movie Stalker is very loosely inspired by.
So you may be out there being like, heck yeah, a super slow-paced, highly philosophical, musing on humanity and desire? Sign me up. Because video gamers love that.
Yeah.
No, very loosely based.
I mean, it is still sort of that.
I mean, you're right. Just with a lot more guns.
I think there's a lot of guns in... they go into the zone also in the original work.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Just a slightly different zone.
That's true. You're right. Yeah, I'm being a little overly facetious. I'm just being like, that's not how you sell your video game. That it's like long shots. Meandering pace. But it took me an embarrassingly long time to clock that like both of those pieces of media that the game is based on predate the Chernobyl disaster.
Yeah, so Stalker took, like, the ideas of, like, the zone from the original works and sort of combined it with the Chernobyl exclusion zone to sort of make their own version of the zone.
Which is neat. It made me give a lot more credit. I was like, oh, to be fair, there have been a lot of, I think, comparisons that exist out there of the kind of like wasteland zone depicted in these pieces of media and the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and these things being kind of like prophetic. But still kind of a dope connection to make for a video game.
Yeah. I mean, they are, what is it, GSC Game World are Ukrainian developers. So it makes sense that they're pulling from things that are culturally relevant to them. Both the actual zone and I think Roadside Picnic was a Russian novel, I believe.
Yeah. So in Stalker, Shadow, I'm really having a very difficult time with the word shadow. I don't understand what's wrong with me. In Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, you wake up, you've got amnesia. Pretty much the same. Again, we're going to do this again with Rune Factory 5. You wake up, you've got amnesia.
Yeah, same game, like we said.
Yeah. And all you have is a tattoo on your arm that says Stalker, right? And you've got a PDA, right? Not a cell phone, a PDA that says Kill S.T.A.L.K.E.R in it. And that's all you know. But you've kind of like woken up with this like shopkeeper guy in this exclusion zone, because what happened in this universe is there's the Chernobyl disaster that we're familiar with, the nuclear like meltdown in the 80s, and then there was a second disaster that happened in 2006, and nobody quite knew why that happened, although you find out in the game, but it caused like all sorts of mutations of the people who had started to kind of like come back to the area, and also changes to the laws of physics in certain areas called anomalies. And also a lot more, radiation and stuff. So you're in this world, you got this PDA that says Kill S.T.A.L.K.E.R, so you're kind of spending the game making your way to the center of the exclusion zone to the power plant with this goal of killing this dude.
Yep, that's the basic gist.
So Stalker seems to be like a very difficult game from what I've read.
I believe there's not like a leveling system. So you can get better equipment and stuff to have, but you yourself don't really get any stronger in the way that you would expect, like in an RPG or a lot of different games.
Like you do in Rune Factory 5.
Yeah.
I'm just going to really try to compare these two games.
Different games now. They're not the same game anymore. So there's no like level up. You yourself don't get any stronger in any particular way. You can get better equipment by like trading with other stalkers, I believe. But and I think you can get AI companions sometimes based on like what missions you happen to be doing. But the AI can die at any time too. It's not very like forgiving about like having you follow like a side quest line. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes the stalker you have to talk to has just been murdered by rabid animals.
Oops.
And there's nothing really you can do about that. So it all depends on you getting better at the game, basically.
Yeah. And the game is itself not super like wanting you to be good at it. Right?
Yeah.
There's probably a whole side quest to talk about at some point. Not that I'm like be excited to do a side quest like just about game guns, right? But like, video game shooting runs the gamut of like lots of auto aim, right? You feel like a living god to, oh my god, this operates like an actual 18th century rifle. And you like have to really aim, and even when you really aim, it probably misses or jams or that kind of thing. And Stalker is much, much, much on that side of things, much more on that side of things, than on the like more standard aim assist sort of situation.
There's also various like status effects you can get. You get hungry, you can start bleeding, and you have to treat your bleeding. And there's also areas of radiation poisoning, which it is kind of forgiving with the radiation poisoning, because once you leave the radiation area, you're okay. Which I don't think is how it works, but...
Look, nobody talks about what happens to this guy a few years down the line.
That's true, yeah.
Like, maybe that, you know, I don't know anything about radiation poisoning, but fine. Let's say it's low level, and he'll just have some bad situations happening.
I guess, but it's like you can die from radiation poisoning within the radiation zone, but as soon as you step out of it, it's okay.
Right. That definitely is how the human body works.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's how it works.
I do want to say, like, this game is not at all like what I'm about to describe it to, but, like, this idea of, like, there's a ton of people treasure hunting in this kind of, like, crappy world has, like, weird Borderlands energy, even though this game is, like, very much not Borderlands.
Well, I mean, I guess, like, the setup of it is similar, but Borderlands, of course, is mad funny. And this is a little slower, I think. I don't think it was made with the intention of being mad funny.
Meditative.
Yeah.
It also reminded me a bit of Death Stranding. I mean, obviously, like...
Yeah, I think that's the better comparison there.
I wasn't actually trying to compare it to Borderlands. It just struck me as I was reading, of like, wow, this is a very weird alternate reality Borderlands situation.
Yeah. One of the people who worked on Stalker went on to found a different company that makes the Metro series, which I think we've talked about the Metro games on the show, but it was a while ago, I believe. But those are, like, if you play those and look at those, they're pretty directly, like, inspired, like a follow-up, a carrying on of what Stalker was trying to do.
There are a few Stalker games. So, the original came out in 2007, after a very long development process.
Yes.
Stalker was sort of like a famous vaporware example until it did finally come out.
Yeah, my impression of the development is that they had a lot of ideas and were very ambitious. And then eventually they brought on a publisher that was like, okay, calm down. Well, let's just make a game. Let's finish the game.
I just feel like whenever I read a Wikipedia article where it's like, the AI thinks on its own, the pavement is wet, dynamic weather, I know that when I get to development, it's going to be like, this game was delayed 4 times.
I mean, especially if it's like 2007, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading, like, the animals have, like, behaviors even if you're not near them on the map, like... It calculates that, like, what they'd be doing in every area of the zone. So, clearly they had a lot of ambitious ideas, and they just needed someone to be like, okay, we have to cut this off now. You have to finish it.
Yeah. And people love the AI for this game and those systems. So, like, they are... well implemented. It's not to knock those. It's just, this is just a pattern I notice when I'm researching these games. I'm like, whenever there's this, like, incredibly detailed mechanics section that someone has taken the time to write through, I'm like, I know we are going to get to development and it's going to be like, originally the game was planned to be 50% larger, but not that this game had that, but still, like, definitely, like, some content that had to be cut to actually finally have a game.
Yeah. And it still came out kind of buggy and a little bit jank, but not necessarily in fully game-breaking ways, just sort of in, clearly there's a lot going on in this game that maybe is not perfectly handled kind of way. But it says a lot about the game that there's still definitely, like, a big cult following around it.
Definitely.
That really likes it.
Well, like most of the old games that we talk about, Stalker, Shadow is really getting in my head. Shadow, I was going to say Stalker, had a few more games come out in pretty quick succession, right? Prequel, Stalker Clear Sky, came out in 2008, in which like you play as a different character and eventually like kind of like find out a little bit more about the origin, not too much, but a little bit more about the origin of the character that you play, in the original Stalker. Which, like, I guess, like, can I spoil what happens in Stalker?
I think we can talk about it a little bit, yeah.
So what happens in the game, right, is you're trying to kill this guy named S.T.A.L.K.E.R. And you figure out that, like, okay, where I need to go is to this thing in the center of the zone called the Wish Granter, which is something that is kind of taken from the movie, right? And so to get there, you're, like, destroying these, like, miracle machines that turn people into zombies, and you eventually get there, and inside this, like, Wish Granter lab, right, there's this thing called the C consciousness, who tells you, you were S.T.A.L.K.E.R all along! Ooh. Which had been hinted at previously, but still. And so basically, that like what was going on in the exclusion zone is that the USSR had, like, once there was this, like, disaster, had used that as an excuse to use this, like, zone where no one was going to do research on the mind. So while they were doing that, they developed ESP, and they, like, took the brains of 7 scientists and put it together and made the C consciousness, right? But this was happening in the late 80s, and of course the fall of the USSR happens a few years later, but this, like, C consciousness continued to research, like, mind control, basically. And so what happened in this, like, 2006 in the game is that they were like, we're gonna bring about world peace with mind control. And that did not work, and instead caused this, like, second disaster.
Yeah.
And so then there's, like, a bunch of different endings to Stalker. Just kind of a hallmark of the series.
Yes, so I read it's dependent on, like, a lot of different things, with examples being, like, how much money you earned, what factions you supported, and, like, how much of your memory you pieced together. So what ending you get is very, like, I think a lot of the endings are just, you go up to this person called the Wish Granter, and they, like, grant your wish, but of course it's not. It's like a trap.
Yeah.
And then the real ending is, like, getting past that to learn about the C consciousness.
So once you get through that gate, you get to choose whether you want to fuse with the C consciousness or destroy it. And I think canonically it's destroyed.
Yeah, because the third game, Call of Pripyat?
I think so.
Is a sequel to Shadow of Chernobyl.
That one seems to have been the best reviewed. I mean, not that it got, like, bad reviews at any point, but that one.
I think people. I read that people were not a big fan of Clear Sky, at least.
And so it would seem from there, for a while, we fell into our early 2000s, this is really mid 2000s game trap of, there are 3 or 4 games, and now it's just laying around dead somewhere. This looked like it was really going to be true for a while, because they announced a new Stalker game in 2010, right after the sequel had come out, and then, like, abruptly canceled it in 2012, with, like, huge staff layoffs and just, like, whole messy situation.
Well, there was rumors before that GSC Game World was possibly going to be closing.
And so then there was all this drama in the meantime of, like, there was a Kickstarter that was sort of making a game that was, like, supposed to be kind of a Stalker spiritual sequel in 2014 that raised a bunch of money. But then it was like, wait a minute, nothing in the trailer is actually new. And, like, most of it is from, like, an assets store, right? And Kickstarter, like, suspended it without really explaining what was going on. So all sorts of messiness in the meantime. But finally, they announced the new actual Stalker 2 is coming. Well, it's now been delayed several times for various reasons, but is now coming out in 2023 to consoles for the first time with Game Pass and on Windows. And maybe to other things too.
Well, you say for various reasons. It's because of the war in Ukraine.
Well, I think it was delayed before that, but then yes.
They released like a video, Xbox on one of like their summer shows. They had like a feature on them where they talked about like trying to continue development on the game, in between like air horns and trying to get out of the country, and like showing like where they're working now. Like they have computers like in their apartments, or a few of them still go to the office, like around like bombed areas. It was they talked about also that it's very hard to be making a game like Stalker 2 where you're, you know, shooting a lot of things and using a lot of guns and explosions while you are also sort of surrounded by that every time, while you're working on it all day.
Also, the man, like several of them filmed videos being like, I'm in the army now.
Yes, a lot of them are also in the army.
So there's the one guy, I'm assuming this is the same video, like standing with his giant gun being like, we're gonna win and then we're gonna give you the game.
Yeah.
And I was like, good for you, dude.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's why Stalker 2, I was confused. I'm glad that this was explained somewhere in my reading, because I was very confused by why Stalker 2's Heart of Chernobyl uses a different spelling. But they changed it to reflect the Ukrainian spelling because of, you know, the war. Well, finally, this game has really inspired, partially inspired. There are, of course, other Chernobyl media that has inspired this too, but has inspired this, like, whole, you know, tourism industry, or, like, boosted the tourism industry. And there are indeed real-life stalkers.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a word that's been adopted, like, into Russian.
Right. I read an article on The Verge about someone who, like, you know, was talking about, like, obviously this did TV show and there's like a Call of Duty level, but that, like, a lot of, like, the tourism interest boom really started with the first release of this game. It was really interesting, right? Like, they talked to, like, people who do, you know, like, legal tours, but also people who want more of the, like, authentic experience, who, like the writer went with them. They, like, waded in, like, chest height through a river, and they hiked for 4 days, and they had to, like, resource manage basically just like in the game. It was interesting. It was not something that I would ever be interested in doing.
No.
But it's interesting that people play this, like, sort of, like, quite bleak, very difficult game, and they're like, ah, yes, that will be my vacation.
Yeah.
But they're considering, like, right now, like, the penalty for, you know, entering the space through, like, illegal means is like, yeah, it's $20, and they drive you back to the police station. So, like, nobody takes it, like, equivalent of $20. Obviously, I think 20 US bucks might be a lot of money, but $20 equivalent. And so nobody's, like, takes it that seriously, right? They're like, yeah, it's the taxi back, right? But they're considering, like, raising the fine, or they were considering anyway. Obviously, this is probably on the back burner now. They were considering raising the fine a lot, and, like, actually trying to, like, develop the exclusion zone more, which is crazy. Imagine gentrifying Chernobyl.
Yeah.
But overall, like, I had seen the NFT stuff around this game, and somehow I don't know, as usual, I sort of hadn't really clocked. I was like, Stalker 2, that sounds like a nothing game. Like, what a weird, like, what a kind of, like, nothing game title.
Yeah, I remember, I thought the first trailer they released for it actually looked really cool. It was at 2 or 3 years ago, one of Xbox's summer events.
Yeah.
They had a big trailer for it. It looked cool in like I'm not gonna play this game because it's a first person shooter, but just good cool atmosphere sort of thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it is tough. It's like, this game seems sort of interesting, and I understand why people would like it, and I wish I had that capability, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, it's scary. I was watching one thing on like a review of Stalker, and they were talking about how the sound design is really good, and they just showed like you go down into this underground area, and there's just like constant like thumping and noises around you, even though they say like basically nothing in this area can actually hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole time you're down there, you're just like scared and on edge. Which also is very cool, but also something I'm not good at.
Emma has baby gamer brain.
I do. I'm the baby gamer.
I don't think there are babies in Rune Factory 5, but speaking of babies.
Sure. Plant babies.
Plant babies. Seedlings. Let's talk about Rune Factory 5. The same game, really.
Same game.
Rune Factory 5, it's a role-playing game, simulation game from Marvelous, published by X-Seed, although I didn't really realize that X-Seed is just a subsidiary of Marvelous.
Yeah.
I'm stupid. But it came out in 2021 in Japan, and this spring in the West. It's the first, like, actual new Rune Factory game since 2012. So another one of these.
Yeah, also similar circumstances because the developer declared bankruptcy and closed, basically, in 2013.
It feels like no games released between, like, 2013 and 2019. Is that just me?
They're not 10 years old yet, so they haven't been in our hat.
I know. I'm sorry, you're right. I recognize that. I just mean that, like, we're doing all these games, and it's like, they released their last entry in 2009, or in 2011, and they didn't release another one until it was announced at a Nintendo Direct in January 2020.
In some ways, I feel like that, like, the PS3, Xbox 360 generation just effed everybody up for some reason.
Well, we were busy developing story, so...
That's right. The Last of Us had just invented narrative.
And everyone was like, oh, crap. Go back to the drawing board.
Oh man, I guess that was the PS4 era, wasn't it?
I don't remember exactly when the PlayStation 4 came out, but
The Last of Us came out in 2013, right?
Yeah.
And that was the end of the PS3. So that makes me feel old.
You're hating on the PS3 for no reason, then.
You're right. I was mean to the PS3 for no reason.
Poor thing. The PS3 that functions better than the PS4 in my house, I think.
Does it?
I haven't tried it in a while, but yes. Anyway, if you're not familiar with the Rune Factory series, it's one of the flagship farming simulator series. I also didn't realize, I'm learning so much, that all of the farming simulators are the same series. I know they're not anymore, but I thought they were 3 separate things, and they're not.
Yeah, so Madelyn's talking about Story of Seasons, Harvest Moon, and Rune Factory.
This is a monopoly.
Yeah.
Why has no one else ever been like, I can make a farming game? I realize one other person has, but why has no one but one other person been like, I can
Square Enix is making one this year.
Good. It's time for the farming sim to come back.
I guess so. Is Animal Crossing a farming sim? Sort of?
No, because
it runs on similar vibes.
It does run on similar vibes, but they added farming so late. I feel like to be a farming sim, you do really have to have, like, deep farming mechanics. Or not, if not deep, like, ongoing farming mechanics.
Yeah, I mean, Rune Factory farming is not the focus of Rune Factory.
I know that, but it does still have the, like, I don't know. I feel like something that feels integral to the farming sim genre for me is that it's not real time. I don't know. Like this.
Oh, okay.
Like the slightly like extended, you can play for several days at a time situation, and like you have to have the, I don't know. I just feel like Animal Crossing doesn't have quite the like gameplay loop that would allow me to truly call it a farming sim.
Well, I don't really think it's a farming sim. I think it just hits the same beats, basically.
That's fair. Although, as someone who's played a lot more Stardew Valley than you, I can't say that Animal Crossing like hits the same beats for me personally. But I think that has more to do with how I play than anything else. Anyway, the original Rune Factory came out for 2006 for the Nintendo DS. It was like a fantasy Harvest Moon Rune Factory, which is like it's a funny title until you realize that it's like they also released a game that was like Space Harvest Moon. Right around the same time for the 10th anniversary. But basically, like, one of the developers described it as Harvest Moon, but you wield a sword.
Yeah, they basically just added, like, RPG mechanics on top of their farming sim.
It's like, you know, the like, this is a Bible verse, right? Like, you turn your swords into plowshares, but here it's turn your plowshares into swords.
Sure. There's also, Rune Factory also has a bit more of like a story and narrative to it. Like it has like a main plot, whereas Harvest Moon has like you interact with the villagers and I think they have stories, but it doesn't necessarily have like a main plot of any sort.
Yeah. Which, like, you know, as usual in games, right? But I think pretty severely in Rune Factory, there's this tension between this, like, the world is ending, help, hurry, kind of story, and also just, like, chilling on your farm. Which, to be honest, feels less and less unrealistic to me as time goes on.
That's fair.
I'm like, indeed, I am more or less just chilling on my farm.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there is no tension to that anymore. The world is ending. And I am just watering my basil plants in the window.
Yeah.
So I can't really critique that anymore. So yeah, I mean, like Emma said, it's like you farm, you talk to your neighbors, you romance your neighbors, you fight some monsters out in some dungeons, you save the world. And in Rune Factory 5, just like in first-person shooter survival horror game Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, you awaken in a mysterious land with amnesia, and quickly kind of join with the local faction there, not the local fashion there.
Local fashion.
That too, but you join with the local faction there to go out and kill some monsters. So pretty much the same game.
Yeah.
How do you get a farm? Like, how are they just like, you have amnesia, own some property? Some boomer stuff.
If nobody else is there, you can put them there. I don't know.
I guess that's true. This is the point in the episode where I say, I'm sorry, listeners. I didn't play either of the games. I'm sorry.
Man.
I know, it's been a bad run. It's
I do feel like Rune Factory is dangerous for you.
Well, so I did sort of, if it hadn't been $60, I might have gotten it. 2, though, having read the actual reviews, I was like, I don't know, maybe I should just like re-download Stardew Valley.
Well, I would probably, if you want to get into it, I would probably recommend Rune Factory 4 Special over Rune Factory 5.
That's what I was seeing too. So Rune Factory 4 came out in 2012, right? But they did a re-release for like all the consoles basically, because Rune Factory 4 was on the 3DS. So they did kind of like an upgraded re-release just last year, right?
I believe so, yeah.
That like Rune Factory 4 was like a really big hit. And a lot of the reviews are like Rune Factory 5 is like maybe kind of worse.
Well, it just has performance issues.
Yeah.
I believe, on Switch.
Yeah.
Apparently it runs fine on the Windows port, but the Switch version is very choppy and sort of has some input lag. It is also not the prettiest game. I think Rune Factory 5 is the first one that's like an over-the-shoulder camera.
Yeah, third person instead of Rune Factory 4 was 3D but top down.
Yeah. So it's the first one that follows you around sort of like a typical third-person action game. And I think there was probably some growing pains with that. And if you think Pokemon is ugly, there will probably be a lot to complain about in Rune Factory 5 so far as the environments go.
How are the trees? How do the trees look?
The grass does not exist. It is just blob.
Well, like, you have to farm it, obviously.
Sure.
You think grass just grows itself?
Sure, yeah.
So that made me feel a little bit better about my choice to not, because like I almost did. I was almost like, okay, and like I'll buy the game and I'll play a little bit of it and I'll probably get into it and it'll be the usual like I played 45 minutes of this kind of situation. But then once I read the reviews, I was like, maybe I'll like watch a little bit of it before I go in or wait for a sale or something like that. Because these games do scratch like a particular itch for me, but mostly reading about it, I was like, I would like to play Stardew Valley again, which is just a personal choice that I have to make, if that's a wise decision. Or do I get Rune Factory 4 special? Maybe I do. Theoretically, there should be more time for gaming. Coming soon.
Theoretically.
Although now that they're giving me Yakuza Like a Dragon, I really need to finish Judgment.
Yeah. One thing that is notable about Rune Factory 5 is it's the first of the Rune Factories to feature same-sex marriage, but only in the English localization, I believe.
I think they've patched it in for Japan now, is what they said.
It in for Japan. Yeah, for originally it was only in the English localization. So the player can marry any of the 12 marriage candidates, regardless of what gender they are.
It was apparently quite a lot of work to make that happen.
Yeah. I mean, sure. They said, like, they had to alter some of the scripting. I don't know how much voice acting Rune Factory has. So, like, obviously changing the pronouns or stuff like pet names. And they made a new, like, stamp design for marriage, like the achievement. It does have alternate cutscenes. I assume those are just with the 3D models, though. Not, like,
look, they billed it as a lot of work. They were like, this was hard.
I feel like you just have to stick the model there. Like, it's work, don't get me wrong. It's additional work, but I do not think it was that much work. I'm skeptical of how much work it was. I mean, it's good that it's there. I'm glad that they did the work.
Overall, it's been a tough decade for the farm sim, huh?
I guess so.
I mean, like, literally, other than Stardew Valley. It just seems like Rune Factory didn't release games for a while. None of these games that have come out on the Switch have been, like, super well-reviewed of the big three. Like, when will the farm sim make its, like, truly triumphant return?
We'll see how Harvestella by Square Enix does this November.
I'm interested.
Or October. October is fall.
This autumn. Well, are you ready to mash?
I'm ready to mash.
I do really feel like we already kind of have it, which is the next innovation for the farm sim is like farming in the apocalypse.
Yeah.
I really don't feel like that exists yet, and I feel like that could be like appealing to the right group of people.
I'm sure something like it exists. It's probably just not popular.
Sorry, nothing like that exists on the scale of the Harvest Moon.
Sure,
Big Three. And I think you could have like kind of like there's like all these new farm types in Stardew Valley since I last played in like 2018. But I do think there's like more of like a ghosty farm now. But I would like to see something that like takes those farm sim mechanics and is like, but actually like the soil is radioactive and you have to like treat it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, it could be just harsher about the farming, right?
the trick there is like, does anyone want that?
And like, if you don't farm well, like your villagers slowly starve and die.
Right. The marriage candidates die.
Yeah. I mean, there could be, because, you know, there's an RPG and there's quests and, like, stalkers. There could be ways that maybe you can, like, make up for poor harvests by, like, you know, like, oh, there's a different new type of seed that will grow better in, like, our soil, you know, and gathering new, like, materials for farming like that.
The more I think about this, the more I'm worried that the core audience for these farming sims will be like, I don't want this. Like, I think it would be interesting and fun, but I realize kind of the point of these games is to be chill. I know that's not ever your experience of farming
I guess,
sims.
but I mean, I think you just take the mechanics of farming, but we're going more for the audience of, like, survival-y games, like,
yeah,
like pathologic type people, you know?
That does
or
make sense.
Frostpunk, stuff like that.
Yeah. But I also want it to be wholesome.
It's so wholesome when you stop your friends from starving.
It would have to have combat, though, right? Like in the Rune Factory, Stardew Valley tradition.
Well, I mean, maybe you could take that out. I do feel like maybe that's a little bit too much.
I mean, yeah, I don't really want it to be farming with guns. I'm just trying to figure out, like,
I didn't mean like with guns. I just meant too many mechanics going on.
No. The legacy of both of these games is too many mechanics, so we got to do it. It's just got to be.
Well,
too
but
much.
if one is so harsh, like trying to keep people from starving and having to like do stuff to bring on new stuff that makes your farm better, I just think that's maybe enough. Is all.
That's fair, I guess. But it's like, are you like like when you're going out, I guess it's more like the Stalker idea of like, you need to like, you know, judge how much radioactivity and like maybe the radiation poisoning that you get does impact your ability, like your stamina meter the next few days.
Yeah, maybe it's more like hunting type combat.
Yeah.
Like more stealth based as opposed to, I think Rune Factory is mostly just like flail your sword around. Yeah. So maybe we make it a little bit stealthier.
It's so interesting that we have created a game that does not appeal to either of the original.
I think people who like Stalker would like this game.
I know, but like you can't sell a farming simulator to men. I'm just kidding.
But you're not. You're taking care of your village.
You're right.
So manly, you know? What it should really feel like, it should, to like the wholesome versus sad vibes, it should feel like doing an Iron Man run on Fire Emblem.
What is an Iron Man run on Fire Emblem?
When you let people die, that's what an Iron Man run is.
That's so funny because like that's just the game.
Sure, but the game is like, you know. You reset. That's the difficulty of it. Right?
I know. I'm just saying it's funny that there has to be a specific name for like the game.
I think it's more for people who like stream it so people know what they're getting into. Right?
Death.
Yeah, death.
Yeah. Is there like an overarching story, do you think? Or is it just like farm survival?
Well, I mean, I think the ending comes when you've been able to like make a good town, you know, that can sustain itself.
Yeah.
Like God blesses you from above and is like, now you shall live, whatever.
So it's like got some like it's like civ elements of like eventually you've advanced enough that like you can purify.
Yeah.
I mean that's kind of like Chernobyl and Rune is also like about like slowly purifying the, I mean obviously this is not like a nuclear wasteland. But I feel like yeah, there's precedent for that. I like that. Or it ends when you just die of prolonged radiation exposure.
There has to be a good ending, though. There's no point in just, like, you play this game till you die.
Yeah.
There's some, like, I guess there's probably some artistic value to that, but what's the point, you know?
Yeah, I think the game is already too bleak to be able to really sustain that, probably.
Yeah.
This would be a tough game to write for. Like, balancing the bleakness with some humor.
Well, it's just a tough game to write for because you have to deal with, like, oh, what if this person's dead? What if this person's dead? What if this person's dead?
You're right. We're gonna have just, like, endless branching paths.
Yeah. And it would be nice, like, you know, if, like, I think in Fire Emblem, usually there's people who either just, like, can't fight anymore because they're so injured because they're essential to the plot, or they're unessential to the plot and they can just cut them out of the scenes. I want us to be a little bit more detailed than that, you know, to really feel the missing hole in your community.
Well, probably it's like, you know, like everybody, you know, in these farm games, everybody has like a job, right? Like there's the blacksmith and there's the shopkeeper. And so probably if somebody dies, it's like that has to affect the running of the town too, right?
Yeah.
But then I think probably also like some of your like searching for resources missions could, like, we could do the Fire Emblem thing of like you can recruit people to your town, like you could find people to rescue, right? There's a trade-off to that, of course, because it's another mouth to feed.
I do think there would have to be, I mean, Rune Factory doesn't quite handle it like this because everybody's a character, just some of them you can't like date, right?
Yeah.
Some of them you can only be friends with. But like we can have a lot of people in the town, but only a few characters that are like, we have to pick like the faces of the town, right?
That makes sense.
So maybe like your number of townspeople can go up and down, you know, and you don't lose anyone like a character, but you can also lose characters.
That's interesting.
And that affects things.
I like that. That definitely makes it, because otherwise it'd be like, like nobody's really ever gonna let someone die if they can avoid it, right? Yeah. That's another thing, like calibrating, like how hard is this game, right? Is it possible to
testing?
Yeah, but it's like, is it possible to do like a Fire Emblem run where it's like nobody dies and like
maybe only on like New Game Plus, you know?
Yeah. Like they don't have to eat anymore.
Yeah.
I think this could work. I feel like this is our first like truly viable. That's not true. I liked our Batman game too.
Yeah.
This is one of our really viable game ideas that we've had in a long time.
Well, all of our games are always very viable. I don't know what you're talking about.
I just mean like this one feels like I would actually like go out and sometimes I make games and I'm like, that's cool, but like I wouldn't play it.
I wouldn't play this game, to be clear.
I mean,
too stressful. I think it sounds neat, but I would not play it. Yeah,
fair enough. I would, though. I would get very into my Apocalypse Farm. That's what it would be called. Apocalypse Farm.
Like Apocalypse Now. That's what it sounds like.
It does sound like that, but I was mostly just going for like a very on-the-nose title.
Okay.
Nuclear plants.
That's funny.
Nuclear plants. Yeah, I think that could work.
Nuclear plant. But plants.
Oh, that is funny, isn't it? I sort of didn't even really do that on purpose, but I do think that's the title. Well, listeners, would you play Nuclear Plants, the game? Have you played any of the Rune Factory games? Did you feel like 5 lived up to your expectations or didn't? Have you played any of the Stalker games? Are you eagerly anticipating Stalker 2 in 2023 or sometime? Do you ever wish that you could go run around a once nuclear wasteland to live out your survivalist dreams? If you have thoughts on anything we talked about this episode or any of those things, you can hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat, and read our blog, featuring long-running series, Click with Boyfriend, Split Screen, and Emma's monthly blogs. Was there a July blog?
No, I'll probably do a July-August blog.
Nice. A summer break. It's good. We all deserve a summer break. But most importantly, if you enjoyed the show, why don't you subscribe? We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, really anywhere that you can find podcasts. Wherever you found the podcast today, you can find and subscribe to Talk This. Next week, it is already Emma's turn to do a side quest, which is unbelievable to me, but it's Emma's turn to do a side quest.
No ideas yet, but you will find out soon.
Tune in next time to figure out Emma's side quest. But then, in 2 weeks, what are we going to be talking about? Take it to the hat.
In 2 weeks, our old game is going to be Radiant Historia.
Nice.
And our new game is going to be Back for Blood.
Excellent.
So look forward to that. I'm sure that'll be a sensical mashup.
It'll make a ton of sense. What's bloodier than history? Nothing. Nothing's bloodier than history. Well, folks, thank you for tuning into the show. We had a good time. We hope you had a good time, too. Emma, do you have a sign-off?
This week, I hope that your crops come out non-radioactive.